Hey guys, Rob here with 3D Printscape. So today I'm going to show you how to set up the laser kit that I bought a little while ago on a 3D printer. There are a couple kits available. I'll link to them in the description below. I went with a 5-watt kit, which you'll see right here, and we'll kind of go over what all that includes. And then there's also a 0.5 watt, which obviously is a lot less power, but there's less risk of it actually causing major problems. And it does also have limitations, so there are some things that it can't do, like actually cutting into the wood. I believe there's also a 2.5 watt laser now, which is kind of a good middle ground. I haven't actually looked at that one too much, but it is something you might want to consider as well. But that said, I do like the 5-watt laser. It has been working out quite well for me. So if I had to buy one again, that's the one I would go with. So in this video, I'm going to talk about what's in the box, go through the initial setup on the hardware side, talk about what we need to do on the software side to get everything working, and then run through an actual test, kind of showing you what it looks like and how to actually get everything to work, because it's not quite as straightforward as you might think. There are a couple things you have to do, but overall it's not difficult, and you can get some pretty cool things. Like this is just a piece of scrap what I was playing with, but you can engrave whatever into it. This is really just more of a getting started and like the basics video. I will be making more videos coming up, going into more detailed settings and some more advanced things. So if you like this video and want to learn more, keep an eye out for those videos. Alright, so before we go ahead and jump through the agenda, if you guys haven't already, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. Alright, so first I'm going to just do a quick overview of what's in the box. We'll jump over to the computer, talk about the software you need and how to actually set that up. And then we'll go back over to the printer, run through the hardware setup, and then kind of jump through what all we need to do for configuration and actually kicking off a print. And the prints go pretty quick. This one right here was about 3.5 minutes, I think. So it's really just one layer. If you look at it from a 3D printer perspective, you don't have the thousands of layers potentially, so it goes pretty quick. This one right here might have been 1.5 minutes. All right, so let's jump over to the computer. All right, guys, so I wanted to start by going over what's in the box, so we'll do that really quick. There are a couple of these test boards. I only have one of them in here right now, but they're just good for testing things out and getting started. The instructions, which kind of leave a lot to be desired. The laser itself, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I got the 5-watt laser, so we'll talk about that more in a bit. Some of the wiring to connect it back to the main board. And again with the wiring, a bracket to help hold the laser, another bracket here, and then the safety goggles, and then another bracket. I did want to spend a second to talk about the goggles really quick. When you're working with a high-powered laser, you do want to make sure you're wearing safety goggles, because that laser, if it reflects, it could cause permanent eye damage. You also want to make sure that it's in an area where other animals or kids or stuff won't be around it and won't be looking at the laser, because it could cause damage. Now, because this is really only doing a layer, it doesn't take as long to run as like a full print, but just keep that in mind. When you're working around the laser, make sure you use the safety goggles. Alright guys, now that we're here at the computer, first thing we want to do is download the Creality workshop. That's going to be used to basically slice the image into G-code so that we can use it for the engraving. So we'll go to this site, I'll link to it in the description below. Just go to download, and it's going to download for me. Once that's downloaded, we want to go ahead and launch the installer, which I'll go ahead and do as soon as it's done. You have to have an account on the Creality forums. It's a free account, so go ahead and create that. And then we want to unzip it. So I'm just going to go to extract all. And we can go ahead and launch that. And we're just going to run through the install using the default settings. And then we can go ahead and launch the workshop. Alright, so this software is pretty basic. I will be doing other videos kind of going into other software, but this will at least get you started. So first thing I want to do is make sure it's set to laser, not CNC, and then choose a different type of, whether it be outline, grayscale, or black and white. My examples here have been outline, so I'm going to go ahead and open the file. Alright, so here's where I have my file, and it has to be a JPEG, so I'm going to open that. And then it'll kind of show you what it looks like when it imports it. You can make adjustments, lighter or darker, but typically it does a pretty good job. So one thing I did want to point out here is if you wanted to go between the different types, you have to delete the image, select the type, and then reopen it. All right, now we want to go ahead and click on the image so that we can change the size. It's better if you kind of zoom in and go all the way over to the left here, because the sizing is kind of weird, and when it zooms in or when you change the size, it's going to kind of throw it all off. But let's say I wanted to do 100 millimeters wide. Go ahead and put 100 and hit enter, and you can see here what it kind of did. And you can make adjustments, kind of just drag it off. You want to make sure the whole thing is at least in the window. And then with that, you want to make sure that the material you're working with is at least 100 millimeters wide. I would probably leave a margin of error, so probably 110 and probably 50 millimeters high. All right, so now that we have our image in here and the right size, let's go over to export settings. And turning on the laser is basically turning on and off the fan, so these are the right commands. You won't have to worry about that. If you wanted to dial down the strength, you could change this from 255 to, I don't know, 125 or whatever if you want it half power. But the main thing we need to tweak in here is going to be our Z height. So depending upon what base we're using, we want to make sure that we account for the base and the height of the material plus the laser focal point. So in my example here, I had two boards that were 15 millimeters thick, and the laser focus point is at 20 millimeters. So I want to make sure these are both set to 50. Travel speed, this is when it's not actually in motion, so I was using 120. And then here is the laser speed, which I'll show you here in a second. Some of the differences. 20, you get like a light line, and then going down from there, the slower you go, the deeper it's going to cut into the wood. So like I said, I got some examples I'll show you in a second, but I settled at 12 for a lot of what I'm doing. So I'll go ahead and do that. Now we can just export. So just go over here to export G-code, and then we'll give it a name. And just do logo, whatever. And then save. Now let's look at that file. So here's our G-code file. Let's go ahead and open it in Notepad. And you can see here, Z height's always going to be 50. It's got all of the movements. The one thing that you have to do every time, if I figure out a way to make it so it doesn't do this, I'll update the comments, but go down to the bottom. You want to remove this line here. The one right before end, because what it's doing is it's lowering the Z height. You could just adjust the Z height as well, but I just remove it entirely. That way it just stays right where it's at, and then save the file. And then from there, you would just save this to an SD card like it was a normal G-code file you're going to print, and then go put it in the printer. All right, the next thing I want to talk about really quick here is the speed of the laser. So when you set in the laser speed in the software, which we'll go over there in a second, you want to make sure you set the laser speed based on what you need. Different materials and stuff will need different speeds, but the important thing to show here is this is 20 millimeters a second, 15, 10, and 5. This is barely scraping into the wood. This one's going down quite a bit and actually kind of burning the wood. For my actual test that I did with this, I ended up settling at about 12. It's important to understand that because A, you want to make sure that you're kind of getting the right depth for what you're looking for, but B, if you're working with thinner wood like this, I tried to do a 5 on this just to see what it would do, and it will actually cut through. So it burned through the other side of here, as you can see, and actually burned into the surface below it. If you dial that down just a tad bit more to like 3 or 2, you can definitely kind of cut outlines and make different things with it with this type of board. That won't be the case with some of the thicker boards, but depending upon what you're working with, you can definitely use it to cut shapes. But I think in most cases, going between 15 and 10 is probably going to be fine. Like I said, I settled on 12 for the one example that I did. All right, guys, let's talk about the install really quick. It's not very difficult. Basically, you've got a couple wires you have to connect, and then if you have the 5-watt laser, you have this mount that you just put on it. It's just the 4 screws you put here, 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 and here, and then we'll put it on the actual printer in a second. If you have the 0.5 watt laser, I think that you end up it has magnets on it. You just stick it to the actual enclosure itself or the case itself. But with that, most people print some sort of bracket to hold it in place so it doesn't move side to side if it gets knocked at all, because that could be bad. You want to keep it straight down. But with the 5-watt laser, it comes with basically everything you need. There are a couple other brackets that it comes with, but those are for different printers. If you're using one of the Creality ones, this is basically what you end up using. All right, so let's go ahead and pop off the bottom of the printer and get to the board, and I'll show you what we need to do. Alright guys, I actually took the screws out off the camera, but if you're familiar with working with these printers, there's 1 screw at the top and 3 at the bottom. So I'll go ahead and pop this up and then put this down. And actually, let me go ahead and turn the printer around so I can zoom a little bit better. Alright, so I went ahead and zoomed in on the board a bit here. What we want to do is go ahead and unplug the fan, which is going to be this blue and yellow wire right here. So just pop that off and just leave it. And then we want to get our red wire here, or red and black wire, and just plug that right in where the fan was at. And then we're going to take the other black wire and plug it into the other side of this. And it does have a second one here if you're trying to run 2 cables over to it, or if you wanted to power the fan at the same time. But I've only actually had to use the one, so it works just fine. But with that, we'll go ahead and just cover this back up and we'll go through the rest of the install process. Alright guys, now we want to go ahead and connect our wire, the black wire here, into that cable we just connected. You'll see that there's a little opening here. We want to make sure that we do it in a way that's not going to run into the track or anything. So I'll just run this around and connect it. And you'll typically run it up the same way as you would like the BL Touch or any other modifications. I kind of just run it along the side here and then over to the hot end, and then use whatever cable management you typically do for that. So zip ties or whatever the case may be. But for now, I'm just going to leave this like this. And then I'm going to grab the laser. So now that we have our mounting bracket on the laser and everything kind of ready to go, one thing I did want to note here is this red case here, it kind of gives you that 20mm gap that it's looking for, but it ends up building up a lot of smoke here. So it does have a hole here where the smoke can't escape. I just wasn't comfortable with it, so I take this off, but you can leave that on, it's your choice. So I'm going to set that off to the side, kind of just go ahead and put this here, and just tighten everything down. And then with that, I can go ahead and plug this into the one for power. And that's really all there is to the hardware install side of this. Nice and simple. Next, let's go ahead and talk about what we need to do to dial in the laser. Alright, now that we got the laser installed, I wanted to talk about one of the differences between this and the 0.5 watt one that you can get. This one has a set focal point, which if you look at the instructions here, it's 20mm above the base. So anytime that we're working with this laser here, we want it to be about 20mm above what the surface is going to end up being. So if we have a scrap board down to protect the build plate and then another board, we want to account for the height of both of those and then put that into the software plus 20. If you went with a 0.5 watt laser, you're going to want to raise your Z-axis to 100, put down a scrap board, and then turn on your fan so that it actually enables the laser. Just make sure you keep your hands out of the way, and then kind of dial in the knob, which the knob will be right down here, until you get a straight line, pretty much a straight line where it's burning evenly, and then you'll want to use that as your height going forward. So if you have it set to 100 as an example, and you have a 20mm base that you're working with, you would set the actual height to 120 when you go to kick something off. Personally, I like it to be fixed. It just makes things a little easier. You don't have to worry about dialing that in, but I guess if you wanted to go with the smaller laser, that's what you have to do. So just keep that in mind. Alright guys, so I wanted to cover this base first. So I'm using a thick base. I will end up making one that's the same size as my entire build plate, but you want to be careful. If you're doing any type of testing and you have the laser too slow, you're risking it going through like it did on here when I was just messing around, and it ended up burning into the item below. So if you have a board here that's a scrap board, it doesn't matter what burns into it, you're good. But if you have your build plate or something underneath it, or even worse, something that's reflective, that can end very badly. So you want to make sure that you have some sort of build plate, and then you want to make sure you're accounting for the height difference of that build plate. So in a test I'm about to show you here in a second, we've got this, and then we've got just another scrap piece that I'll be working with. So total, we've got 15 millimeters, 15 millimeters, and then 20 for the focal adjustment for the laser. So that puts the Z height at 50 millimeters, which is where we want to have it. If you have one of the other lasers, we have to dial in the adjustment. You can change that height, but you want to make sure that it's going to be consistent so you don't have to do it every time. Alright guys, so let's go ahead and walk through kicking off the print. First thing we want to do is go ahead and auto home the printer. So I'm going to do that. So just going into menu here, go down to prepare and auto home. Then like I mentioned a bit ago, if you have the red cover on, you can decide whether you want to leave it on or not. I found that it just collects too much smoke and it's not that far off. So I'll go ahead and take it off. If you're using one of the other lasers where you're further away, it doesn't even have the red cover. So it's really just your choice. Alright, so now what we want to go ahead and do is raise this up to the height that we want to be working with. So we've got two boards that I'm using here, and when we talk about it in the software, basically it's going to be 15 millimeters, and then we need to have the laser 20 millimeters above that, which is where the focal point for this laser specifically is. And as I mentioned earlier, if you're running one of the other ones where you have to adjust the focal point, you're probably about 100 millimeters up, but in this case I want to go about 50. So the G code will have the Z height on it, but with that said, you want to make sure that you go up to that height where you want to start, because as soon as it kicks off that print, it's going to start that laser, and if you're too low or too high, it doesn't matter, it doesn't care. It's just going to keep going while it's getting into position. So I like to have it at the right height first. So let's go ahead and raise this to 50. All right, so we're going to go into the menu here, go to prepare, move axis, we'll move Z axis up 50. And I know I'm not really zooming in on the screen much, but I'm literally just doing basic commands here, just moving the axis. Now we want to go back and then go up one level, and then go up one more level, and then go down and disable steppers. So the reason we need to disable the stepper here is because we need to change where it thinks its home or 0, position is on X and Y. So we want to kind of pull this out a little bit here and move this over, and we want to put our bigger board down first, and then put our board that we're going to be using for the cut down or the engraving, and then we will kind of position the front of the laser to where we want it to start on the board. This is kind of a manual movement, but it's going to start the print from there. Alright, so that's about where I want to start it. Now we want to go ahead and put on our safety glasses. I will make a note here that if you wear normal glasses, these things do not go over them nicely, so I have to take mine off. But it's important that you wear the safety glasses. And I am going to turn off the light for this part of the recording, just so you can see it a little bit better. Alright, then we want to go into our menu and go down to print from our card, and then choose whichever one you want to print. So I'm printing my 3D Printscape logo. I'm just going to select that, and it's going to go. Alright, that's done. It only took about 3.5 minutes here. If we go ahead and pull that off, you can see here, everything is pretty nice. So to the 3.5 minutes really quick. Obviously, it's going to be a lot quicker than printing something in 3D because you're just doing the one layer. So it's essentially just one layer of what it would be if you were doing 3D. So that's why you can go a lot quicker. I think like this one here probably took about 1.5 minutes if I remember correctly. So it doesn't take long. The other thing that I wanted to mention really quick was you see how the laser stopped here, right where it finished? I'll show you how to make it do that. There was a change I had to make to the G-code once you slice it. For some reason the software wants to try to lower it, and if you leave that line in there, it's going to actually jam the nozzle straight into what you were just working with. Alright guys, so that covered everything you need to get started with working with the laser. It's basically, like I said at the beginning of the video, a quick intro guide kind of covering everything you need. But there will be more videos coming up, kind of getting into more detail, going over some tips and recommendations and stuff. Don't forget to wear your safety goggles when around the laser, and make sure that you don't have any kids or animals in the same room with it. The prints go pretty quick, so it's easy to kind of keep people out, but you don't want to risk any type of injury to the eye. If you have any questions about what I covered here or would like to see any other videos, go ahead and leave a comment below or join us on Discord. Thanks.